So let's get started on our book launch, Movies and Mental Illness. Today's speakers, let me start by introducing myself. I'm Pamela Becker, and I'm the General Manager for Hogriffa Publishing here in the United States. And I'm coming to you today outside of Boston in our offices. And I'm a psychologist, and I have to admit, I really love movies, but I didn't think about until I started working with Dr. Wedding how much characters in movies could contribute to my understanding of mental health issues. So I'm very excited to listen to Danny tell us about his book and his writing process as he marries movies and mental illness. As we are talking, if you have questions you would like Dr. Wedding to answer, please put them in the Q&A section of the webinar. We will answer as many as we can during our time together. But before Danny gives us his thoughts and talks about his new book, I want to introduce two other distinguished psychologists with ties to the film community who are going to speak to us about their experience in this world and their use of Danny's books. First is Don Grant. Dr. Grant is an internationally recognized and award-winning media psychologist, author, and published researcher with specific expertise in technology's impact on mental health. He serves on numerous committees for the American Psychological Association, but has also been a member of the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists for 40 years. Dr. Grant received his BA with honors from the University of Michigan, his MFA from the University of Southern California, and has both an MA and PhD, summa cum laude, in psychology with an emphasis in media psychology from Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara. He has used past editions of movie and mental illness in his teaching and therapy sessions and currently lives in the LA area. Coming to us from the other side of the country is Frank Farley. Dr. Farley is a professor emeritus at Temple University. He was born and raised in Alberta, Canada, and has a BA and MA degree in psychology from the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, and a PhD from the University of Psychiatry, University of London in the United Kingdom. After which he emigrated to the US for a professorship at the University of Madison in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. After several years at Madison, he moved to Temple in Philadelphia to a named chair where he recently became emeritus. Dr. Farley is a film buff, having seen many movies and published many movie reviews. He's a former president of the American Psychological Association and many other local, national, and international professional associations, including the Society for the Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts, and the Society for Media Psychology and Technology. He has co-edited a book on the arts and has done experimental research in arts and aesthetics, and has been interested in Hollywood relevant to psychology, and has been interviewed in Hollywood relevant to psychology and film. So you can see we have a lot of expertise on the phone today. And finally, the star of our webinar is Danny Wedding. And Dr. Wedding, we are so proud to launch his 5th edition of his book. He's published more than a dozen books, and in addition to the new Movies and Mental Illness, which we're launching today, he's currently working on another book titled Movies and Multiculturalism. Service to the American Psychological Association has been an important part of Dr. Wedding's life, and he has been on numerous boards and councils for APA. In addition to his psychology work, however, he worked for the U.S. Congress for 2 years, a year in the Senate and a year in the House. He completed 2 Fulbrights in Thailand and South Korea. He retired from the University of Missouri School of Medicine and has been editor-in-chief for the Hogriffa Publishing APA Division 12 series on evidence-based practice, with more than 50 volumes published so far. So, to get us started, Don, can you please tell us a bit about why you support Danny and his vision to publish the now 5th edition of Movies and Mental Illness? How have these books been helpful to you?
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you so much for inviting me to support Danny. I just want to say when I was invited, I was so honored and humbled. I have known Danny as a colleague, as a friend, and as a mentor, and I could not be more thrilled to support him. This is an honor beyond belief. But as you mentioned, so it's kind of interesting what this book to me, because I have both an MFA and an MA. The MA is in psychology. The MFA was a long time ago now, but it was in film and television from USC. So kind of have a little background of that. I also live in Los Angeles. But what I wanted to talk about and how I wanted to support and explain how I feel this book is so pertinent is a couple of things I just want to throw out first. Movies have to me, my opinion, movies have an almost absolute global external validity. And I'll evidence that in a second. Psychological struggles show zero prejudice against any population. So when you look at these two things of how they amalgamate, I'm just going to throw out, and we'll see what your audience thinks. If I said the following: fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. You can't handle the truth. I could have been a contender. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. I am the captain now. You're going to need a bigger boat. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. There's no place like home. Show me the money. I'll be back. And finally, may the force be with you. So if you had any reaction to any of those, or know where any of them or all of them are from, that's my evidence to demonstrate how globally pervasive and movies are. In my private practice and when I work with groups, I have used not only Danny's work, but also just movies in general. When I'm working with a client who has a psychological issue, or maybe they're struggling, because what I find is that movies are something we can all relate to. And so when I'm working with a client or when I'm talking in a group and I reference a movie or a character in a movie, it's an easier way to maybe approach the situation. And when you look at Danny's book and when you read Danny's book, the comprehensive of it, the brilliance, the academic wizardry that this incredible human being has done to synthesize psychology in movies, I just kept turning the pages going, wow, but it made sense. So when we work with clients psychologically, we're always trying to we talk about meeting them where they are. And I'm going to just propose to you and posit that meeting them in a common platform about a movie and a character in a movie, pretty much it's going to land. So thank you very much, Danny, for all of your work, for just this one of many projects that you've given and shared with the world. But for this one in particular, it really resonates with me and with my clients. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Don. We really appreciate it. And yes, I took the book home last night. It is available, everyone, and had a good time snuggling up. It's a little chilly here in the Boston area. Frank, I'm going to turn over to you. You are a self-proclaimed movie buff, and you are also well-versed in psychology. So please tell us why this book is something that you think psychologists could use.
Well, Don has said a lot of, has really covered a lot of the relevant territory, but this is a massive contribution to filmology. There's just nothing to compare. There's nothing like it. And it's terrific for our field, psychology, because everybody loves the movies. And it's one of the greatest gateways into discussions about important features of human behavior. This is the Bible of mental illness and movies. There's just no question. 500 pages, single spaced. I mean, the amount of work that went into this is just astounding. So the movies are terrific. And I've used them in courses. Sometimes I've taken a whole class, my therapy class, for example, taken the whole class and gone out to the movies, and then have discussions afterwards.
Mhm.
And so the movies are simply a terrific entree into psychopathology, into all relevant ideas bearing on psychotherapy and treatment and care. So this again is the guide. This book will be so useful for many years, until Danny has to do a 6th revision. And so there's I can't say enough good things about it. Every psychologist should have it. And it's not only terrific for students and those who are learning about the field, but it's terrific for people like me, faculty, and because there are so many insights. I mean, every single page seems to have a fresh and interesting insight. And Danny has a way of looking at the movies that is different, I think, from most people. It's more valuable. It's more useful. This is a practicum for psychotherapy, and it's also valuable for the science of psychology as well. How is the science being represented and depicted in movies? And because movies, as people are going to movies. They may not be going to a therapist or going to a psychology class or reading a psychology book. And so much of what they know about psychology, they're getting from the movies. And so this book can be their guide. And I hope that movie makers read this book, directors, producers, actors, etc. I hope they read this book, because it'll be an eye-opener at so many levels for them and valuable for them.
All right.
So I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. And you mentioned something that I think is important. This 5th edition of the book. I'm going to turn to Danny now and take you back. How did this first idea of marrying movies and mental illness come to you? Because we talked about it. It's almost a 35-year-old idea now. How does this topic remain so important to you, and how can it be relevant to the rest of us?
Thank you, Pamela. There's a long history with the book, and it's been around. The first edition was published in 1998. So it's we've got about a 30-year history of thinking about and writing about films. I'm delighted that my friend Marianne Boyd is on the call, and the book had its genesis in conversations that Marianne and I had over lunch. And she's a psychiatric nurse. I'm a psychologist, and we had a psychiatrist who was very interested in movies. And the three of us would have lunch together at Huntington State Hospital every Monday. And inevitably, we would talk about the films that we'd seen over the weekend and discuss it. And then I got in the habit of after those conversations, taking notes. And the psychiatrist who was part of the group moved on, but Marianne and I continued to talk about movies. And I developed a set of 3x5 cards, and just got in the habit of every time I would see a psychologically relevant film, I would jot down a few notes to myself. And those cards eventually grew into a course at Marshall University that I taught, looking at the way that psychopathology is portrayed in films, and eventually became the first edition of this book. We paid Jack Nicholson a few $100s to use a still from As Good as It Gets on the cover. And then some years later, the second edition came out about 6 years later, and we paid Russell Crowe a few $1,000s to use his image from A Beautiful Mind on the cover of the book. And then still later, the third edition came out. We couldn't afford Russell Crowe or Jack Nicholson anymore, so we just had a depressed teenager pose for us, and we had a silhouette. And then there was a fourth edition, and now we have a fifth edition of the book. So I'm really pleased with the history of the book. I'm very grateful for Marianne's help with the first three editions. And somewhat later, Ryan Nemec joined the team. And so Ryan was a young psychologist when he started working with me. And he and Marianne and I worked on several editions together. Eventually, their work took them to other things. Marianne is best known as the author of an important textbook on psychiatric nursing, and that takes a lot of her time. Ryan is an expert on positive psychology and works at the VIA Institute and spends a great deal of his time writing about positive psychology. So he and I have a companion book called Positive Psychology at the Movies, also published by Hografa. And Ryan and I agreed that I would take sole responsibility for the fifth edition and that he would take sole responsibility for the next edition of the book, Positive Psychology at the Movies. But people sometimes ask me, how can you take time to see so many films and write about them? And I think to understand that, you need to realize that I have been doing this for literally 30 years. And so I've had lots of help from Ryan and Marianne, but I've also spent a good part of my life watching movies and writing about them. We've got a number of people on the call who are old friends who have been involved with me in this project. Raymond Abdul Rahman is working with me on the new book on multiculturalism. Pat DeLeon is on the call. Pat was my mentor when I worked on the Hill, worked for the Congress. David Shapiro is an old friend, and I've talked to Lenore and David many times about movies. Debbie Jaffe Ellis is on the call. She's a great friend. Ofer Zur is a psychologist who shares my passion for films and who writes about them. John Norcross was one of my reviewers for Psych Critiques, a journal, an APA journal of book and film reviews that I edited for 14 years. John was one of my best reviewers. My friend Rose is on the call. And so a number of people who have been involved with the book over the years have phoned in to participate, and I hope they'll have questions and comments later on. So the book's been a big part of my life. I have truly enjoyed it. I've cherished the time that I've spent watching movies. Those lunchtime conversations grew into a book, and that book has occupied a great part of my life. I've published 13 books, and this is the one that I value the most and actually cherish. So it's been important to me these many years.
Great. Oh, I'm so excited to hear that. So you brought up something. You have a lot of friends who are on the call and some people who are familiar with how you have structured the book. And then there's some newbies like me. So can you tell for all of us, I think this is a little bit of restructuring we did with the fifth edition. Can you tell us a little bit about how this fifth edition is structured?
Rob Dimbleby is my editor at Hografa, and Rob and I have talked about this, and he's been involved since the very first edition of the book, and we've been friends for many years. And the book started off as a textbook for classes in abnormal psychology, actually lower level classes, typically at a community college or an undergraduate institution, although sometimes the book is used as a supplemental text in graduate courses in psychopathology. But our target audience was college professors who were interested in building courses around films. And so they would have their students watch a movie and then come to class prepared to talk about it and talk about what the film got right and what it got wrong. But after going to a number of conferences and talking to a number of people, it became clear to Rob and me that the larger audience wasn't college professors or students. It was mental health professionals who were interested in being better clinicians, people like Don, who found that talking about films sometimes was relevant in psychotherapy. So we, with the new edition, we took the pedagogical material and stripped it out of this edition and put it on a separate website that will be available to anyone who is using the book as a text. And so there's a lot of information there. There are teaching tips, some suggestions about how I've used films in the class. There are critical thinking questions. There are a number of articles and books and chapters for further exploration by students. I'd oftentimes have my students read one article in addition to the chapters in movies and mental illness. And there are patient evaluations in the supplemental materials on the web. So if your students are interested, they can see a patient evaluation of Norman Bates or Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. So and a community college student who's thinking about going into psychology or medical school or nursing will oftentimes find this useful. And I'd have my students watch a film and then write up a patient evaluation, including a mental status exam on the characters in the film. And so I found this pedagogically useful, and my students enjoyed it and thought it was fun. So I've been doing this for a long time, and it probably is telling that I recognize every quote that Don used earlier. Those are all films that I've known and loved these many years. So maybe I've been doing this too long. But the new edition very much focuses on practicing clinicians. And so we're hoping that psychiatric nurses and psychiatry residents, I know we have a couple of psychiatry fellows on the call. So we're hoping that students in the mental health professions will find the book relevant, but also practicing clinicians who want to be better clinicians and who want to learn more about psychopathology or review their understanding of psychopathology with the book. So we hope that this is successful, and we're very much reaching out to a group of clinicians this time rather than solely college professors.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And we do that a lot at Hogrefa with books that are used in classrooms. We have the supplemental materials available separately. It's all easy to understand. It's in the book how to access it, and it's also going to be in an email we'll send everybody. So if you still like that part of the book, it's available. But the way that this is set up, as Danny explained, I think works really well for individual and practicing clinicians. Now, we've had a couple questions that weave into one that I had asked you to prepare, which was, how do you choose the movies and the psychopathology to highlight in the book? The extra question that came in almost at the beginning of the webinar was, and how do you decide which ones don't make it? So just talk a little bit about your inclusion process, I think.
I'm fascinated with films. And so I frequently go to the Internet Movie Database or Rotten Tomatoes and read about new films and try to be alert for any films that address psychopathology. But in addition, I've got a number of colleagues who are active in the Society for Media Psychology and Technology. Don and Frank are both past presidents of that group, and they've made recommendations, and they know about my interest in films. They know about my books. And so they will frequently drop me a note or see me at a conference and recommend films that should be included in the book. There's also the Society for Aesthetics, Creativity and the Arts, Division 10 of APA. And I've worked with that group over the years, and they've been very helpful as well. So a lot of my friends and colleagues suggest films, and I go with those. It's hard to decide what to exclude. I try to exclude films that are difficult to access, that students wouldn't be able to secure on their own through streaming media or through a rental of some sort. but sometimes bad films can be pedagogically useful. And so a film like Split that portrays a man with schizophrenia, a man with multiple personality disorder, actually. And it's a good movie. It was directed by a friend of Frank's. It's well done, very, very beautifully done, I think, as a movie, but it shows a character who has one personality, one alter, in which he injects himself with insulin because he's diabetic. But in fact, if a non-diabetic did this, they would probably die from it. And so there are things like that I try to point out in the book itself. There are films that I've loved, like A Beautiful Mind, which I found just to be an amazing film. Ron Howard is a great director, and I think it's really powerful. But people with schizophrenia rarely have visual hallucinations of the kind portrayed in the film. They have auditory hallucinations, but Ron Howard knows that it's much more dramatic if you portray a scene in which John Nash is seeing something that's not there. So I point out problems like that with the films that we discuss.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was reading about some of that last night. That made a lot of sense to me. Another question we had was, when you're looking at movies, have you thought, or maybe this is something that you've thought about already, including streaming services and their series? And the one that's mentioned in the Q&A, I actually have watched myself, called Shrinking, with Harrison Ford and Jason Segel. And I thought that was really interesting and well done too. Are streaming services next up on the 6th edition, maybe?
You know, I hope there is a 6th edition. I've got to find a literary heir, actually, to take over these books for me, because frankly, I don't have time to keep up with both films and TV series. There's just too much out there. And so I've either got to find a collaborator who watches TV, or I've got to start doing it myself. But early on, I made a very conscious decision to focus on films. And there are a lot of TV series that are psychologically relevant, but I tend not to watch them because I spend 2 or 3 evenings a week watching movies.
Great. And then one other thing came up in the chat was about bibliotherapy. And somebody had asked, have we heard of it? Have we heard of it? Is this a term? But I think, and cinema therapy. So I think that's what we're talking about here, though, right?
Yeah, when I was a practicing clinician for the first 10 years or so of my career, I would always use bibliotherapy. In fact, I would frequently recommend Albert Ellis's A New Guide to Rational Living, and have almost every client that I saw read that book. It was really helpful. It's a small extension to incorporate films into psychotherapy, and I've got a number of friends who are doing this. I haven't been a practicing clinician for many years, but people like Don have found it useful to work films into their practice. And I used to live in West Virginia, actually, and had a number of clients who were illiterate. And so they would come in for therapy, and I couldn't assign them books to read because they didn't read. And this was the exception, but I did have some clients who would welcome a chance to go out and see a film and come back and talk to me about it.
Great, great.
So there's growing interest in cinema therapy, and a number of people are writing about it now. And a number of my psychiatry and psychology friends are finding ways to incorporate movies into the therapy.
Exactly. Great. Well, if you have more questions, please put them in the Q&A function and we can get to those. But I am aware of the time. So we're staying here. We're going to keep talking, but I was going to throw up a screen in case anyone's interested, where you can order and pricing. There's also a discount code we want all of you to use. And if you see this here, don't worry, we're also going to include it in an email that we'll send to you tomorrow as a follow-up. But just to know, we think that this makes a nice little holiday gift for some people if you have that in mind. But it's also obviously just a great book for yourself. So there is a discount code. valid till the end of the year. Gosh, I was going to say the end of the month, and it's the end of the year already. So that will also be in an email that'll be coming to you. So let's go back, Danny. Thank you for popping that up there for us. Appreciate that. Just a couple of more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So one, somebody's teaching a new psych and film now, and have used your text for the last 5 years. One of the student projects is going to be about antisocial personality disorder, and the assignment asks them to locate an insider-produced 10-minute documentary or TED Talk or short film. Do you have any recommendations, new recommendations? And do you have anything on depersonalization, derealization? So first is antisocial personality disorder. Second is depersonalization, derealization.
Yeah. For antisocial personality disorder, I've got a whole chapter in the book that deals with that and with personality disorders in general. I would encourage students who are interested in antisocial personality in particular to watch No Country for Old Men, an amazing film that is on my all-time list of favorites. I don't know much about 10-minute clips or TED Talks or that kind of thing that might be relevant, but I'd hope that a web search would help with that. What was the second part of the question, Pam?
So the first one was the antisocial. The second one was just the depersonalization, derealization.
Yeah, we talk about fugue states and movies like Unknown White Male, and there are a number of films like Paris, Texas, that deal with depersonalization and fugue states and that kind of thing. So there's actually a whole section of the book devoted to that. And I'll just refer the person asking the question to the book, because we have extensive discussion of films that deal with that. It's a common theme in movies and a powerful theme. It's relatively rare in clinical practice, but it's common in film portrayals of mental illness.
Great. Another question is, how do you select and use films that depict psychological treatment?
There are a lot of films that show treatment, that show psychotherapy. There are a lot of them that make us look foolish as professionals, that make us look like buffoons and inept and bumbling. What About Bob comes to mind as a film that about transference and countertransference. But I try to look for good examples of psychotherapy. There are people on the call who are old enough to remember Ordinary People, and just a really powerful film. And it's Judd Hirsch plays a psychiatrist in the film, and it's a very sympathetic portrayal of psychotherapy and a very positive portrayal. We have an appendix in the book that lists accurate portrayals of psychotherapy and inaccurate portrayals of psychotherapy. And we've got about 50 films in each column. So there are a lot of films that show therapists doing unethical things, having affairs with their patients. Mr. Jones with Richard Gere comes to mind. And so we try to highlight those instances in which the portrayal of psychotherapy is inaccurate or misleading or unethical.
Great. I think that will help answer the other question that came in about what kinds of movies. As you pointed out, there's a whole list of them in here, which can help to hone psychotherapy skills with folks. And I have to say, of course, I watched Ordinary People, and I might have been in graduate school at the time. I don't want to disclose too much. But it was funny because, does everybody wear sweaters like Judd Hirsch, to do psychotherapy? Like that was the thing. I think the last question, which I think is a good one to end on, is, do you have a list of 5 favorite films? And can you tell us why these films are top on your list?
Wow. if this is a real dilemma for somebody who loves movies to pick your 5 favorites. Certainly, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest would be an all-time favorite. A Clockwork Orange, certainly Fargo, just an amazing movie. The Coen brothers are astonishing directors. They're so talented and so clever. And more recently, I loved Oppenheimer. I thought that was just a superb film. I was delighted to discover that that Oppenheimer had actually given a keynote address at an American Psychological Association meeting some years ago, and he talked about the differences between physics and psychology, and how physics was a much older and much more mature profession, and was sort of grounded in certainties in a way that psychology wasn't. So I just found things like that really intriguing. So Oppenheimer would be on the list, and Killers of the Flower Moon certainly would be on that list. And that was a film I saw last week and thought it was absolutely magnificent. So I'm predicting that it's going to get the award for Best Picture.
All right, you heard it here, everybody. And just a little fun fact, Oppenheimer went to the University of Göttingen, which is where the headquarters for Hogrefe Publishing are located. So
Right.
Just all come around. Yep, the world is very small, everyone, which is actually nice. And it's a fun kind of thing. Let me just double check. Yep, I think that's what we've got. So thank you everyone for attending. We will, any comments that you put into the Q&A, Danny's going to see those, and I know he'll be able to respond. We'll send you a follow-up email tomorrow. As I mentioned, there is a discount code if you want to purchase before the end of the year. And if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to any of us. And I really want to thank Frank and Don for being with us and for chatting with us, and for understanding how important this book and this information can be to the psychological community. So thank you everyone for attending. Any last words, Danny, before we pop everyone off?
I just like to say personal thanks to Frank and Don, and also my many friends who are on the call. And I have grown old as a psychologist, but I've loved my career. I've loved just about every minute of it. It's been so much fun, and incorporating movies into my passion for psychology has really enriched my life. So I hope some of the people on the call will find it just as enriching and just as rewarding. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day and happy holidays.